My neighbor passed me on my morning walk and whispered, "Don't go back home. Leave now." Her words hit me like ice water in my veins. Half an hour later, it all made sense. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. That Tuesday morning in Brooklyn felt different from the moment I opened my eyes. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, with that heavy silence that comes when you live alone but shouldn't have to. I was 72 years old, and my mornings had become a ritual of survival rather than living. The alarm clock's shrill cry at 6 sharp pulled me from dreams that were always better than reality. I shuffled to the kitchen in my worn slippers, the ones with holes that I kept promising myself I'd replace. The linoleum was cold against my feet, and the fluorescent light buzzed like an angry wasp above my head. I made my coffee the same way I had for 40 years, 2 spoonfuls of instant, a splash of milk that was probably a day past its prime, and enough sugar to make the bitterness bearable. The apartment smelled of old wood and something I couldn't quite place. Maybe loneliness has a scent. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with the persistence of time that felt like it was moving too slowly and too fast all at once. Each tick reminded me of another second spent waiting for phone calls that never came, for visits that were always postponed, for the love I had given so freely, but never seemed to receive back. I wrapped my navy cardigan tight around my shoulders and stepped outside into the gray October morning. The air was thick with that autumn dampness that seeps into your bones and settles there like an unwelcome guest. My daily walk wasn't really about exercise anymore. It was about escaping the echo chamber of my own thoughts, the walls that seemed to close in a little more each day. The sidewalks of Bay Ridge were cracked and uneven, telling stories of countless footsteps and harsh winters. I walked past the corner store where Mr. E. Kim always waved, past the bus stop where teenagers gathered before school, past the rows of brownstones that held families I could hear laughing through their windows. Their joy felt like a foreign language I had forgotten how to speak. In my coat pocket, I clutched my phone like a lifeline. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today my son Michael would call just to say hello, or my daughter Janet would remember that I existed. Maybe my grandson Tommy would text me one of those funny pictures he used to send. But the phone remained as silent as a stone in my palm. I had been walking for about 20 minutes when I saw Mrs. Delgado ahead of me. She was watering her small front garden, the one she tended with the devotion of someone who understood that growing things was an act of faith. We had been neighbors for 15 years, sharing polite nods and small talk about the weather. But something in her posture that morning was different. As I approached, she looked up from her roses with eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. We had never been close, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. 2 women who had given everything to their families and somehow ended up feeling invisible. That's when it happened. Mrs. Delgado dropped her watering can and grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her fingers dug into my cardigan as she pulled me closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't go back home. Leave now." The words hit me like a physical blow. Her eyes were wide, almost frantic, darting toward my building and then back to my face. There was fear there, but also urgency, as if she was trying to save me from something I couldn't yet see. "What do you mean?" I stammered, but she was already backing away, shaking her head. "Just trust me," she said, her voice breaking. "Walk to the coffee shop on 5th Avenue. Stay there for at least an hour. Please." And then she was gone, disappearing through her front door like a ghost, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my heart hammering against my ribs. The morning suddenly felt colder, and every shadow seemed to hide something sinister. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my mind racing through possibilities. Was there a gas leak? A break-in? Had something happened to one of my family members? The questions multiplied like bacteria in my brain, each one more terrifying than the last. But something in Mrs. Delgado's eyes had looked knowing, not the fear of immediate danger, but the sadness of someone who had witnessed something they wished they hadn't. It was the look of a woman who understood betrayal in its most intimate forms. You know that feeling when you realize everything you thought you knew about your life might be a lie. That's what hit me as I walked away from my building, my legs moving without conscious thought toward Fifth Avenue. The familiar streets suddenly felt foreign, as if I was seeing them through different eyes. I had been walking these same routes for years, but that morning, every step felt like I was moving toward a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The weight of Mrs. Delgado's warning pressed down on my shoulders like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. The coffee shop she mentioned was a small place called Brooklyn Beans, wedged between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy. I had passed it hundreds of times, but never stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and the smell of fresh coffee and pastries wrapped around me like a warm embrace. I ordered a cup of tea, Earl Grey, the kind my mother used to make when I was a child, and found a table by the window where I could watch my building in the distance. My hands trembled as I lifted the cup to my lips, and I realized I had been holding my breath for what felt like hours. As I sat there, nursing my tea and watching the clock on the wall tick away the minutes, memories began flooding back like water through a broken dam. All those times I had felt like something was wrong, like conversations stopped when I entered a room, like plans were being made without me. I thought about the inheritance I had received from my mother 3 years ago. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial. Enough to make my final years comfortable. Enough to help my children if they needed it. The money had been sitting in various accounts, some in traditional savings, some invested in stocks that my late husband had chosen years before his death. There had even been a small amount in Bitcoin, something my tech-savvy grandson Tommy had helped me set up during one of his rare visits. "Grandma, this is the future," he had said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "You should diversify your assets." I hadn't really understood it, but I trusted him, and the investment had grown considerably over the past 2 years. The total was somewhere around $800,000. Not enough to make me wealthy, but enough to make me valuable. The thought made my stomach turn. I remembered the conversations that had become more frequent lately. Michael asking about my financial situation, Janet wondering if I had updated my will, questions about power of attorney, about my mental capacity, about whether I was managing okay on my own. At the time, I had thought they were being caring, maybe even protective. Now, sitting in that coffee shop with Mrs. Delgado's warning echoing in my mind, I began to see those conversations in a different light. My phone buzzed, making me jump. It was a text from Janet. "Mom, we're all coming over this afternoon around 2 p.m. We need to talk about your living situation. Don't make any plans." The message was cold, businesslike. Not, "How are you feeling?" or, "Would this time work for you?" Just a command disguised as information. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, and something inside me began to crack. That's when I understood why Mrs. Delgado had looked at me with such sadness. She had seen them. She had seen my children, maybe with a real estate agent, maybe with legal documents, maybe planning my future without me. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours, watching my building from the window, seeing cars come and go, seeing people I didn't recognize walking up and down the street. At one point, I saw a van parked near my building with the name of a moving company on the side. My blood turned to ice. The young barista, a girl with kind eyes and purple streaks in her hair, must have noticed my distress because she brought me a free refill and a small chocolate chip cookie. "Are you okay, ma'am?" she asked gently. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to explain that my children, the babies I had carried in my womb, fed at my breast, rocked to sleep through countless nights, were apparently planning to dispose of me like an inconvenience. Instead, I just nodded and thanked her for her kindness. As I sat there, more memories surfaced. The sacrifices I had made over the years seemed to parade before my eyes like a funeral procession of my own making. When Michael was in college, I had worked double shifts at the hospital where I was a nurse, my feet aching in those white shoes, my back screaming from lifting patients twice my size. Every paycheck went toward his tuition, his books, his living expenses. When he graduated, he hugged me tight and promised he would take care of me when I got old. When Janet got divorced, I took out a second mortgage on my house to help her pay for legal fees and child support for Tommy. I had believed in her, supported her, even when she screamed at me that I didn't understand what she was going through. I had nodded and written another check. When my husband got sick, really sick, I sold my mother's jewelry, pieces that had been in our family for generations, to pay for experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Janet and Michael had promised to help, but there was always an excuse, always a reason why they couldn't contribute. After he died, they consoled me with words about how I was so strong and how I didn't need anyone. They made my independence sound like a virtue, but I was beginning to understand it was really just convenient for them. I remembered the birthday 2 months ago when neither of them called. When I mentioned it the next week, Janet said, "Oh, Mom, you know how busy we are. We thought about you. Thinking about someone isn't the same as caring enough to pick up the phone." I remembered the time I was in the emergency room with chest pains, and I called Michael from the hospital bed. He said he would try to get there soon, but he never came. Later, he explained that it was just anxiety and I was being dramatic. The doctor had said it was a panic attack brought on by stress and loneliness, but I didn't tell my children that part. The pattern was becoming clear, like a photograph developing in slow motion. For years, they had been training me to expect less, to need less, to ask for less. They had been slowly erasing me from their lives while making sure I remained available for their financial needs. I pulled out a small notebook I always carried and began writing down all the money I had given them over the years. The list was longer than I expected. Car repairs, down payments, temporary loans that were never repaid, emergency funds for emergencies that seemed to happen with suspicious frequency. The total was staggering. Over the past 5 years alone, I had given them more than $60,000. Money from my retirement, money from my husband's life insurance, money from my mother's inheritance. Money that was supposed to secure my future had been steadily flowing to fund their presence. And now, apparently, they wanted the rest. The thought made me feel physically sick. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. The woman looking back at me was 72 years old, with silver hair that needed coloring, and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, worrying about people who clearly weren't worrying about her. But there was something else in that reflection, something I hadn't seen in a long time. It was anger, pure and righteous, and long overdue. I returned to my table and called a taxi. It was time to go home and face whatever was waiting for me there. But first, I made one more call, to my bank, to check on my accounts and make sure nothing had been moved without my knowledge. Everything was still there, still in my name, still requiring my signature, for now. The ride home felt like traveling to my own execution. The familiar streets blurred past the window as I tried to prepare myself for what I might find. Would they be angry that I wasn't there waiting for them? Would they have already started packing my belongings? Would they even notice that I had been gone? As we pulled up to my building, I saw them all there, just as Mrs. Delgado had probably seen them that morning. Michael's car, Janet's SUV, and a white sedan I didn't recognize. They were standing on the sidewalk in front of my building, talking in hushed tones with a woman in a business suit who was holding a clipboard. I paid the taxi driver and walked toward them, my legs feeling like they were made of water. They looked up as I approached, and I saw something in their faces I had never seen before. It wasn't love or concern or even familial obligation. It was calculation. "Mom," Janet said too brightly, too loudly. "There you are. We were worried sick when you weren't home." The lie rolled off her tongue so easily it made me dizzy. They hadn't been worried. They had been inconvenienced. Michael stepped forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We brought someone we'd like you to meet, Mom. This is Mrs. Patterson from Sunset Manor. It's a really nice place, and we thought you might like to take a tour." Mrs. Patterson extended her hand with the practiced smoothness of someone who had convinced many elderly people to give up their independence. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said warmly, "your children are so concerned about you living alone. Sunset Manor offers 24-hour care and social activities that I think you'd really enjoy." I looked at each of them. My son, my daughter, this stranger who was supposed to solve the problem of my existence. Behind them, I noticed Mrs. Delgado, watching from her window, her face etched with sympathy, and something that might have been pride. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Janet and Michael exchanged glances, and Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we've been talking about this for a while," Janet said carefully. "You know you've been more forgetful lately. And with your arthritis getting worse, we just want to make sure you're safe." Forgetful. The word hit me like a slap. I wasn't forgetful. I was ignored. There's a difference between losing your memory and having no one who cares enough to make memories with you. "I see," I said. "And you decided this without talking to me first?" "We tried to talk to you," Michael said defensively. "But you always change the subject or get upset. We thought it would be easier to just find you a nice place and then discuss it." Easier. For whom? I looked at Mrs. Patterson again. She was younger than me by at least 20 years, with perfectly styled hair and a smile that probably worked on families who were overwhelmed and desperate. But I wasn't overwhelmed, and I was only desperate in the way that comes from finally seeing the truth. "What happens to my apartment?" I asked. "Oh, well," Janet said, stumbling over her words. "We'd have to sell it to pay for the facility. But don't worry about that now. Let's just go see the place first." There it was. The truth. Naked and ugly in the afternoon sunlight. They wanted my apartment, my savings, my assets. They wanted to warehouse me somewhere convenient while they liquidated my life. I thought about the Bitcoin Tommy had helped me buy, now worth considerably more than my initial investment. I thought about the stock portfolio my husband had built over 30 years of careful planning. I thought about the life insurance money I had been saving for emergencies, for my final years, for the possibility that my children might actually want to spend time with me instead of spending my money. "No," I said. The word came out quietly, but it landed with the force of an earthquake. All three of them stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "No?" Michael repeated. "No," I said again, louder this time. "I don't want to tour your facility. I don't want to sell my apartment. I don't want to make any decisions today." Mrs. Patterson's smile faltered. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I understand this might feel overwhelming, but your children really do have your best interests at heart. Perhaps we could just take a quick look." "My best interests," I interrupted, surprised by the steel in my own voice, "would be for my children to visit me occasionally, to call just to see how I'm doing, to include me in family decisions instead of making them about me behind my back." Janet's face flushed. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. We do visit. We do call." "When?" I asked. "When was the last time you called? Either of you. When was the last time you invited me to dinner or asked how I was feeling? Or spent an hour with me that didn't involve asking for money?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. "Perhaps I should give you all some privacy to discuss this as a family." "Good idea," I said. "Thank you for coming, but we won't be needing your services today." She packed up her clipboard and promotional materials with the efficiency of someone who had been dismissed before. As her white sedan pulled away from the curb, I felt a small surge of satisfaction. It was the first time in years I had said no to something my children wanted, and the feeling was intoxicating. Michael stepped closer to me, his voice taking on the tone he had used when I was being difficult about his college expenses, or his wedding costs, or his mortgage problems. "Mom, you can't live alone forever. You're getting older, and things are going to get harder. We're trying to help you plan for the future." "Whose future?" I asked. "Mine or yours?" The question hit its target. His face tightened, and I saw a flicker of the anger he usually kept hidden beneath his veneer of concerned son. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about the money," I said, surprised by my own boldness. "All of it. The loans that were never repaid, the emergencies that kept happening, the inheritance money you've been so worried about." Janet's face went pale. "Mom, we never what? Never planned to put me somewhere I couldn't manage my own affairs? Never discussed selling my apartment? Never calculated how much my estate would be worth?" The accusations hung in the air like poisonous fumes. I could see in their faces that every word was true, and the knowledge broke something inside me that had been cracking for years. "You want to know what's really sad?" I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "It's not that you need my money. It's that you've convinced yourselves you deserve it without having to actually love me for it. Michael's composure finally cracked. That's not fair, Mom. Of course we love you. Do you? I asked softly. When was the last time you enjoyed spending time with me? When was the last time you called because you missed me? Not because you needed something. The questions fell between us like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward into uncomfortable truths neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Janet began to cry, the kind of manipulative tears that had worked on me for 30 years. Mom, you're hurting our feelings. We're trying to take care of you, and you're making us sound like terrible people. But something had shifted inside me. The tears that would have once made me fold, made me apologize, made me write another check and pretend everything was fine, now just looked like what they were. A performance designed to make me feel guilty for wanting to be treated with basic human dignity. I'm going upstairs now, I said calmly. I need some time to think. Mom, wait, Michael called after me. We should talk about this more. We should, I agreed. But not today. And not with deadlines and ultimatums and strangers with clipboards. I walked toward my building entrance, my legs steadier than they had been in months. Behind me, I could hear my children whispering urgently to each other, their voices tight with frustration and something that might have been panic. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I thought about Mrs. Delgado watching from her window that morning. She had seen something. Maybe the real estate agent, maybe the moving truck, maybe just the cold calculation in my children's faces as they planned my future without me. But she had also seen something else. She had seen a woman worth saving, worth warning, worth the risk of getting involved in a neighbor's family drama. For the first time in years, someone had looked at me and decided I was worth protecting. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. The grandfather clock was still ticking. The air still smelled of solitude, but something fundamental had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had left that morning clutching her phone and hoping for scraps of attention from people who saw her as a problem to be solved. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the wooden box where I kept important papers. Birth certificates, my marriage license, my husband's death certificate, bank statements, investment portfolios, the deed to my apartment. Tangible proof of a life lived, of choices made, of assets accumulated through decades of work and sacrifice. At the bottom of the box was my will, the one I had updated after my husband's death. In it, I had left everything to my children equally, trusting that they would use their inheritance to build better lives for themselves and better futures for their children. Now, I looked at that document and saw it differently. It wasn't a gift of love. It was permission for them to wait for me to die. That evening, as I sat alone with a cup of tea and the weight of the day's revelations, my phone rang. For a moment, my heart leaped with the old hope that it might be one of my children calling to apologize, to explain, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. Instead, it was Tommy, my 16-year-old grandson. Grandma? His voice was tentative, young, uncertain. Are you okay? Mom and Uncle Michael are really upset about something that happened today. Sweet Tommy, the one bright spot in a family that had forgotten how to love without conditions. He was the only one who still sent me funny memes, who called on random Tuesdays just to tell me about his day, who seemed to actually enjoy my company. I'm okay, sweetheart, I said, meaning it for the first time in months. How are you doing? How's school? We talked for 20 minutes about his classes, his friends, his hopes of studying computer science in college. He was brilliant and kind and full of the energy that comes from being young and believing the world is full of possibilities. Finally, he said quietly, Grandma, I don't think you should go to that place they want you to go. You're not crazy or anything. You're just lonely. And that's not the same thing. Out of the mouths of babes. This child, this beautiful boy who was still becoming himself, could see what his mother and uncle had chosen to ignore. That isolation isn't mental illness, and wanting companionship isn't incompetence. Thank you for saying that, Tommy, I said, my voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than you know. I love you, Grandma. Like actually love you. Not just because I'm supposed to. After he hung up, I sat in my darkened apartment and cried. Not the bitter tears of earlier, but something cleaner, more cathartic. Someone in this family still saw me as a person worth loving, not a portfolio worth inheriting. That night, I made a decision that would have terrified me just 24 hours earlier. I was going to take control of my own life, even if it meant losing the people I had spent 72 years trying to please. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. For the first time in memory, I wasn't dreading the day ahead. There was something powerful about having a mission, about having decisions to make instead of waiting for other people to make them for me. I dressed carefully, not in the old cardigan and comfortable shoes of someone waiting to be managed, but in the navy dress I had worn to my husband's retirement party years ago. I put on lipstick, something I hadn't done except for funerals and holidays. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman preparing for battle. My first stop was the bank. The branch manager, Mr. Chen, had known me for over a decade. He was a kind man in his 40s who always asked about my family and remembered details about my life that my own children seemed to forget. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said warmly as I approached his desk, "how can I help you today?" "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I said simply. Over the next hour, we went through everything: the savings account, the certificates of deposit, the investment portfolio, even the Bitcoin wallet that Tommy had helped me set up. I wanted to understand exactly what I had, where it was, and who could access it. The numbers were larger than I had realized. With the growth in the stock market and the incredible rise in Bitcoin value, my total assets were now worth well over $1 million. Not enough to make me wealthy by today's standards, but enough to make me very comfortable for the rest of my life, or very attractive to people who saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance. "I want to set up some new accounts," I told Mr. Chen. "Ones that require only my signature for access." He nodded professionally, but I could see the understanding in his eyes. He had probably helped other elderly customers protect themselves from financial abuse by their own families. It was more common than anyone wanted to admit. "I also want to change my beneficiaries on all accounts," I continued. "For now, I want to remove my current beneficiaries and add only my grandson, Tommy Rodriguez Patterson." Mr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment. That was why I liked him. As we worked through the paperwork, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of making my own decisions. Every signature, every initial, every choice was mine alone. For decades, I had deferred to my husband, then to my children, asking their opinions and seeking their approval for decisions about my own life. Not anymore. My next stop was a small law office I had found online, run by an attorney who specialized in elder law and estate planning. Margaret Walsh was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with family photos and the kind of lived-in feeling that told me she understood the complexities of family relationships. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, offering me tea and settling behind her desk. "What can I do for you today?" I told her everything. The morning walk, Mrs. Delgado's warning, the attempted ambush with the nursing home representative, the years of financial manipulation disguised as family need. She listened without judgment, taking notes and nodding at the familiar patterns of elder abuse. "You're not alone in this," she said finally. "Unfortunately, financial exploitation by family members is one of the fastest-growing crimes against seniors. The fact that you recognized it and took action puts you ahead of many people in similar situations." "What are my options?" I asked. Over the next 2 hours, she outlined various strategies for protecting my assets, my autonomy, and my dignity. We discussed new estate planning documents, financial powers of attorney that couldn't be misused, and legal mechanisms to ensure that any future decisions about my care would require court oversight rather than family pressure. "The most important thing," she said, "is that you understand this may damage your relationships with your children, at least temporarily. People don't like losing control over money they've been counting on." "They already damaged the relationship," I replied. "They just never bothered to tell me." By the time I left her office, I had a comprehensive plan. New will, new powers of attorney, new beneficiary designations, and most importantly, a legal framework that would make it impossible for anyone to make decisions about my life without my explicit consent. But the most significant change I made that day wasn't legal or financial. It was psychological. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped caring more about other people's feelings than my own. That evening, I cooked myself a proper dinner. Not the heating of frozen meals or the opening of canned soup that had become my routine, but an actual meal with vegetables and seasoning and care. I set the table with my good plates, the ones I had been saving for special occasions that never came. As I ate, I realized that this was a special occasion. It was the first day of my life as a free woman. My phone buzzed several times during dinner, texts from Janet and Michael that grew progressively more urgent and less polite. They wanted to continue our conversation and clear up any misunderstandings and work together as a family. The language of people who suddenly realized their plan was falling apart. I didn't respond to any of them. 3 days later, Janet showed up at my door unannounced. Her face was red and puffy from crying, and she clutched a box of tissues like a security blanket. "Mom, please," she said as soon as I opened the door. "We need to talk. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I feel terrible about how things went the other day." For a moment, I felt the old, familiar tug of maternal instinct, the desire to comfort my child and make everything better. But then I remembered the woman with the clipboard, the plans made without me, the years of being seen as an ATM with legs. "Of course," I said calmly. "Come in." She followed me to the living room, looking around as if she was seeing the space for the first time. Maybe she was. When was the last time she had actually visited me here, rather than just stopping by to ask for something? "Mom, I know you're angry," she began, "but you have to understand our position. We worry about you. We love you." "Do you?" I asked simply. The question stopped her mid-sentence, just as it had stopped Michael a few days earlier. "Of course I do," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "When?" I asked. "When do you love me? When I'm writing you a check? When I'm babysitting Tommy so you can go out? When I'm agreeing to whatever you think is best for me?" She stared at me with the expression of someone who had never been asked to examine her own motivations. "That's not fair," she said finally. "Isn't it? Janet, when was the last time you called me just because you wanted to hear my voice? When was the last time you invited me somewhere because you enjoyed my company? When was the last time you asked about my feelings, my hopes, my fears? Anything that wasn't related to my ability to help you financially?" The silence stretched between us like a canyon. I could see her searching for examples, for evidence that her love was real and not just convenience disguised as affection. "We've been busy," she stammered. "You know how it is with work and Tommy and everything." "I do know," I said gently. "I was busy too, when you were growing up. I worked double shifts to pay for your school clothes, your music lessons, your college tuition. But I was never too busy to love you. There's a difference between being busy and being indifferent." She began crying again, and this time I could see that the tears were real, not manipulation, but genuine distress at being confronted with uncomfortable truths about herself. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "You start by deciding whether you want me in your life or whether you just want my money," I said, "because you can't have both anymore. Not the way things have been." "What do you mean?" I pulled out the documents I had prepared, the ones that would ensure my future was in my own hands. Power of attorney forms that required court oversight, a new will that distributed my assets based on actual relationships rather than blood ties, financial arrangements that protected me from being pressured into decisions I didn't want to make. I mean that if you want to be my daughter, you need to start acting like one. If you want to visit me, you're welcome anytime. If you want to talk to me, call whenever you'd like. If you need advice, emotional support, or just someone to listen, I'm here. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle between us. But if you want my money, if you want to make decisions about my life, if you want to treat me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved, then we don't have anything to talk about. Janet stared at the documents in my hands as if they were weapons pointed at her heart. "Mom, you don't understand the financial pressures we're under," she said, her voice taking on the wheedling tone I had heard so many times before. "Tommy's college fund isn't where it should be, and with the economy the way it is—" "Stop," I said firmly. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You came here claiming you love me, claiming you want to repair our relationship, and within 5 minutes you're asking for money again. The words hit her like physical blows. She recoiled, her face flushing with shame and anger. "So what are you saying? That you're cutting us off? That you don't care about your own family?" "I'm saying that I'm done being a bank that your family makes withdrawals from without ever making deposits of love, time, or attention," I replied. "I'm saying that if you want to be in my life, you need to want me, not my assets." She stood up abruptly, clutching her purse and her tissues. "This is ridiculous, Mom. You're being selfish and dramatic? We're your children. We deserve—" "You deserve nothing," I said quietly, and the words felt like liberation. None of us deserves anything from our parents except love while we're children. After that, everything else is earned through how we treat them, how we honor them, how we value them as human beings. Janet stared at me as if I had grown a second head. In her world, family obligation was a one-way street. Children took from parents, and parents gave until there was nothing left to give. "Fine," she said, her voice cold, "if that's how you want it. But don't come crying to us when you realize you need us more than we need you." The threat was supposed to hurt, supposed to make me beg her to stay, to apologize for standing up for myself. Instead, it just made me sad. Sad for the woman who could only see relationships in terms of power and dependency. Sad for the mother who had raised her children to believe that love was something you could buy and sell. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. The grandfather clock ticked away the minutes, but for once the sound was comforting rather than oppressive. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. There's a difference between solitude and abandonment, and I was finally learning to tell them apart. Over the following weeks, the attempts at reconciliation came in waves. First, there were the phone calls, Michael's voice tight with controlled anger, demanding that I reconsider this foolish course of action. Then came the emails, longer and more detailed, explaining all the ways my new independence was going to hurt the family. Janet tried a different approach, sending Tommy to see me with messages from her. But Tommy, wise beyond his years, saw through the manipulation immediately. "Grandma," he said during one of his visits, "Mom asked me to tell you that she's sorry and she misses you. But I don't think she actually said that to me. I think she just thinks that's what you want to hear." I hugged him tight, grateful for his honesty and his insight. "What do you think, sweetheart? Do you think I'm being unfair to your mother and uncle?" He considered this seriously, the way teenagers do when they're trying to figure out the grown-up world. "I think they got used to treating you a certain way," he said finally, "and now they're mad because you changed the rules. But the rules were kind of unfair to begin with. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. I don't want you to feel like you have to choose sides," I told him. "Your mother loves you, and I love you. This is between the adults." "I know," he said, "but I also know that you've never asked me to choose. You've never made me feel guilty for loving them. They can't say the same about you." That summer, something unexpected happened. With the financial pressure removed from our family relationships, I began to discover who I was beyond the roles of wife, mother, and provider. For the first time since I was a young woman, I had time, energy, and resources that were entirely my own. I joined a book club at the local library, filled with women my age who had also navigated the transition from full-time caregiving to independent living. We met every Thursday afternoon, discussing novels and sharing stories about our lives, our struggles, our triumphs. For the first time in years, I was part of a community that valued my opinions, my experiences, my presence. I started taking art classes at the community center, watercolor painting, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy managing everyone else's needs. My first attempts were terrible, but the instructor, a patient woman named Rosa, encouraged me to keep trying. "Art isn't about being perfect," she said during one particularly frustrating session. "It's about expressing what's inside you, and you have a lot inside you that's worth expressing." She was right. As weeks turned to months, my paintings began to reflect not just what I saw, but what I felt. Colors that spoke of loneliness and hope, brushstrokes that captured the texture of memories, compositions that balanced solitude with possibility. I also discovered something I had forgotten about myself. I was funny. In the book club, in the art classes, in casual conversations with neighbors I had never taken time to know. I found myself making people laugh, not the bitter humor of someone resigned to suffering, but the warm, observational comedy of someone who had lived long enough to see the absurdity in human behavior. Mrs. Delgado and I became genuine friends. She was a widow too, with children who lived across the country and grandchildren she saw twice a year if she was lucky. But unlike me, she had learned early to find fulfillment in friendships, hobbies, and personal interests, rather than waiting for family to fill all her emotional needs. "The mistake we make," she said one afternoon as we shared coffee on her small porch, "is thinking that because we gave our children life, they owe us theirs. But children are supposed to leave. That's the whole point of raising them." "Then what's the point of family?" I asked. "The point is love without conditions," she said simply. "But that has to go both ways. You can't love someone just because they're related to you, and you can't expect them to love you just because you're related to them. Love is a choice, not an obligation." It was the wisest thing anyone had said to me in years. That autumn, Janet called me for the first time since our confrontation. Her voice was different, smaller, less demanding, tinged with something that might have been genuine regret. "Mom," she said quietly, "how are you?" The question was simple, but it was the first time in years she had asked it without an agenda attached. "I'm well," I said carefully. "How are you?" "I'm struggling," she admitted. "Tommy's been talking to me about the way we've treated you. He's pretty mad at me, actually." I felt a pang of sympathy for her. It couldn't have been easy to have her own child call her out on her behavior. "He loves you," I said. "But he's also old enough to see things clearly. He said you've been teaching him about investing," she continued, "about managing money and making good decisions." This was true. During Tommy's visits, I had begun sharing some of the financial knowledge I had accumulated over the years. Not to burden him with adult responsibilities, but to help him understand the importance of financial literacy and independence. "He's a smart boy," I said. "He should understand these things." "He also said you're happy," Janet said, and there was wonder in her voice, as if the concept of my happiness was something that had never occurred to her. "I am," I replied honestly. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "I don't know how to fix what I broke," she said. "You start by deciding what you actually want," I told her. "Do you want a relationship with me, or do you want access to my resources? Because those are two different things, and I'm only offering one of them. I want my mom back," she whispered. "I'm here," I said simply. "I've always been here, but I'm not the same person I was before. I won't go back to being someone who gives until there's nothing left and never receives anything in return." "I know," she said. "Tommy helped me understand that. He said you're not mean or selfish. He said you're just finally taking care of yourself the way you took care of everyone else for so long." Smart boy, my Tommy. Over the following months, Janet and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on new terms. It wasn't easy. There were false starts, moments when she slipped back into old patterns of seeing me as a resource rather than a person. But there were also genuine moments of connection, conversations where she seemed to actually see me as an individual with my own thoughts, feelings, and needs. Michael took longer to come around. His pride was wounded, and his financial situation was apparently more precarious than I had realized. He made several attempts to circumvent my new boundaries, talking to bank officials and lawyers about my mental capacity, and trying to find legal ways to override my decisions. But Margaret Walsh had prepared for this. Every document was ironclad. Every decision was documented with witnesses and professional assessments that proved my competency. Michael's efforts only succeeded in making him look desperate and greedy to the professionals he approached. Finally, after months of Cold War, he showed up at my apartment one evening. He looked tired, older than his 45 years, worn down by the stress of trying to control something that was no longer his to control. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "I need help." The old me would have opened my checkbook before he finished the sentence. The new me invited him in and listened. His business was failing. His marriage was strained. He had been counting on his inheritance to solve problems that money couldn't actually fix. And when that safety net disappeared, he had been forced to confront the mess he had made of his life. "I'm not asking for money," he said, though I could see the effort it took for him to say those words. "I'm asking for advice, I don't know, help figuring out how to fix things without expecting someone else to pay for it." It was the first honest conversation we had had in years. I made tea, the ritual that had become my way of marking important moments, and we talked until late into the night. Not about money or obligations or family duties, but about life choices and consequences and the difference between helping someone and enabling them. "I think I've been waiting for you to die," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The admission hit me like a physical blow, but it was also the truth I had been avoiding acknowledging. "I know," I said quietly. "That's awful," he said, tears streaming down his face. "What kind of person does that make me?" "It makes you human," I replied. "It makes you someone who took the wrong lesson from growing up in a family where love was tied to financial support." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of decades of misunderstanding settling between us. "I don't know how to fix this," he said finally. "You start by building a life that doesn't require my death to make it work," I said gently. "You start by finding reasons to want me around that have nothing to do with what you'll inherit when I'm gone." It was brutal honesty, but it was also the only foundation on which we could rebuild our relationship. That winter was the first in years that I didn't spend the holidays alone. Not because my children included me out of obligation, but because I had created a chosen family of friends, neighbors, and people who actually enjoyed my company. Rosa from the art class invited me to her family's Christmas Eve dinner. Mrs. Delgado and I exchanged small gifts and watched old movies together on New Year's Eve. The book club organized a potluck where we shared not just food, but stories about our families, our losses, our hopes for the coming year. Tommy spent a week with me during winter break, and for the first time since he was small, our time together wasn't overshadowed by family drama. We cooked together, went to museums, had long conversations about his plans for college and his dreams for the future. "Grandma," he said one evening as we sat by the window watching snow fall over Brooklyn, "I'm proud of you." "For what, sweetheart?" "For choosing yourself," he said simply. "For teaching me that it's okay to have boundaries. For showing me what self-respect looks like." I hugged him close, grateful for the wisdom of this remarkable young man who would soon be off building his own life. "I hope I haven't made things too difficult for you at home," I said. "You haven't," he replied. "You've made them more honest. And that's better, even when it's harder." By spring, the changes in my life were visible to everyone who knew me. I had lost weight without trying, simply because I wasn't stress eating or numbing my emotions with food anymore. I was sleeping better, walking taller, laughing more often. My watercolor paintings had improved dramatically, and Rosa suggested I enter a few pieces in a local art show for seniors. The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. When was the last time I had put myself out there, risked failure, tried something new? The night of the art show, I stood in the community center surrounded by paintings and sculptures created by people like me, seniors who had discovered that creativity doesn't have an expiration date. My 3 small watercolors hung on the wall with little cards underneath bearing my name and the prices I had nervously assigned to them. To my amazement, all 3 sold. Not for enough money to matter financially, but for enough validation to matter emotionally. Someone had seen value in my work, had been willing to pay for the privilege of taking home something I had created. Janet came to the art show, surprising me with her presence and her genuine enthusiasm for my paintings. She bought a small landscape I had painted of Prospect Park, not because she felt obligated, but because she genuinely liked it. "I had no idea you were so artistic," she said, studying the painting closely. "Neither did I admitted. "Turns out there were a lot of things about me I didn't know. I'm sorry I never asked," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I never saw you as anything other than Mom. Like that was the only thing you were allowed to be. It was the closest thing to a real apology I had gotten from either of my children, and it meant more to me than any amount of money ever could." That summer brought another surprise. I decided to take a trip, not to visit family or fulfill obligations, but simply because I wanted to see somewhere new. I chose Santa Fe, New Mexico, drawn by pictures of the desert landscape and the vibrant art scene. It was my first solo vacation in decades, and I was nervous as I boarded the plane. But as the hours passed and the landscape changed below me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the unknown. Santa Fe was everything I had hoped for, and more. The light was different there, harsh and beautiful, casting shadows that changed throughout the day. The art galleries were filled with work that challenged my understanding of what art could be. The food was spicy and complex, flavors I had never tried before. I stayed at a small bed and breakfast run by a woman named Carmen, who treated her guests like welcome friends rather than customers. We talked about art and travel and the courage it takes to start over in the second half of life. "You have good energy," she told me one morning over breakfast. "You feel like someone who just figuring out who she really is." She was right. At 73 years old, I was finally becoming myself. I extended my planned week-long stay to 2 weeks, then 3. I took watercolor workshops with local artists, hiked in the desert, slowly but successfully, and even went to a dance class for seniors where I laughed more than I had in years. When I finally flew home to Brooklyn, I carried with me not just souvenirs and new paintings, but a deep sense of my own capability and worth. I could travel alone, make friends with strangers, navigate new places and experiences. All the things my children had convinced me I was too old, too fragile, too dependent to do. Janet was waiting for me at the apartment when I returned, holding a small potted plant and wearing an expression that was part worry and part admiration. "How was your trip?" she asked. And for the first time in years, the question sounded like she actually wanted to hear the answer. I told her about the workshops and the hiking and the new techniques I had learned. I showed her the paintings I had created, the photos I had taken, the small treasures I had collected along the way. "You look different," she said finally. "I feel different," I replied. "Good different?" "Very good different." We sat together in my living room, looking through my travel photos and talking about art and adventure, and the possibilities that still lay ahead. It wasn't the relationship we used to have, but it was better, more honest, more respectful, more real. "Mom," she said as she prepared to leave, "I've been thinking about something you said, about love being a choice, not an obligation." "Yes, I want to choose you," she said simply, "not because I have to, not because I need something from you, but because I want to know this person you're becoming. This person you maybe always were, but I was too selfish to see." It was the most beautiful thing she had ever said to me. That autumn, I received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson, the nursing home representative who had tried to sell my children on warehousing me 2 years earlier, appeared at my door with a clipboard and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, "I hope you remember me. I'm following up on our previous conversation about your living arrangements." I looked at this woman who had once represented everything I feared about growing old: the loss of autonomy, the reduction to a problem to be solved rather than a person to be valued. "I remember," I said calmly, "but I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'm not interested in your services." "Oh," she said, consulting her notes, "but your son Michael called last week and said that your situation had deteriorated and you might be ready to reconsider." The betrayal hit me like a slap. Even after everything we had been through, after all the conversations about boundaries and respect, Michael was still trying to circumvent my decisions and control my life. But this time, instead of crumpling under the weight of family manipulation, I felt something else entirely: clarity. "My son," I said firmly, "does not speak for me. If I ever decide that I need assisted living, I will make that choice myself. I will research the options myself. I will make the decision myself, and I will certainly not need him to make that call behind my back." Mrs. Patterson looked confused. "But he's your emergency contact, and he seemed very concerned." "He's concerned about his inheritance timeline," I interrupted. "But that's not your problem, and it's not mine either anymore." I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving her standing in the hallway with her clipboard and her sales pitch for a future I had no intention of accepting. Then I called Michael. "Did you contact a nursing home about me?" I asked without preamble when he answered. The pause told me everything I needed to know. Mom, I just thought, you thought you could make decisions about my life without consulting me, I said. Again, you're being difficult, he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I had once found intimidating, but now just found pathetic. I'm being independent, I corrected. There's a difference. You can't live alone forever, he said, repeating the refrain I had heard so many times. You're right, I said, surprising him. I can't live forever. None of us can. But I can live alone for as long as I choose to, as long as I'm capable of it, and as long as it makes me happy. But what if something happens to you? Then something happens to me, I said simply. Michael, I'm 73 years old. I've buried my parents, my husband, and several friends. I understand mortality better than you think I do. That's not what I mean, he said, frustrated. I know what you mean, I replied. You mean, what if something happens to me before you inherit my money? But that's your problem, not mine. The conversation ended badly, as they all did with Michael. But I no longer felt guilty about his anger or responsible for his disappointment. I had spent decades trying to manage other people's emotions, and I was done. Margaret Walsh had warned me that family members often escalate their behavior when their previous tactics stop working. She had prepared me for legal challenges, emotional manipulation, and even attempts to have me declared incompetent. What I wasn't prepared for was for it to simply stop. One morning in late October, almost exactly 2 years after Mrs. Delgado's warning had changed my life, I woke to find a letter that had been slipped under my door during the night. It was from Michael, written in his own handwriting rather than typed on his computer. The paper was wrinkled, as if it had been crumpled and smoothed out several times. Mom, it began, I don't know how to apologize for the things I've done, the person I've been, the son I've failed to be. I've been angry at you for 2 years, but I think I've really been angry at myself. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing his financial struggles, his fear of failure, his realization that he had been treating me like a retirement plan rather than a person. It was raw and honest and painful to read. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter concluded. I don't expect you to trust me again, or help me again, or even want to see me again. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I've lost. And it wasn't your money. It was you. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box where I kept important papers. Whether or not Michael and I could rebuild our relationship remained to be seen. But this was a beginning, an acknowledgement of harm done and responsibility accepted. That afternoon, Tommy stopped by for one of his regular visits. He was 17 now, applying to colleges, on the cusp of becoming an adult. Our relationship had become one of the most treasured parts of my new life, regular, consistent, based on genuine affection rather than obligation or need. Did you see Uncle Michael's letter? He asked, settling into the chair that had become his usual spot. You knew about it? He asked me to read it first, Tommy said. He wanted to make sure it didn't sound like he was just making excuses or trying to manipulate you again. Smart boy, asking for a teenager's perspective on emotional honesty. What did you think? I asked. I think he's finally starting to grow up, Tommy said, which is pretty sad when you think about it, since he's almost 50. We laughed together, but there was affection in the laughter rather than cruelty. Even Tommy, who had witnessed his family's treatment of me firsthand, wanted the adults in his life to be capable of growth and change. Grandma, he said after a while, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you lonely? I mean, really? Not having Mom and Uncle Michael around the way they used to be? It was a perceptive question, the kind that required an honest answer. Sometimes, I said, I miss the idea of having close family relationships. I miss the fantasy of children who call because they love me, not because they need something. But I don't miss being used. I don't miss feeling worthless. I don't miss waiting for crumbs of affection from people who saw me as a burden. Do you think they can change? He asked. Your mother is trying, I said. Your uncle, maybe. But even if they can't, even if they never do, I've learned something important. What's that? I've learned that I can love people without letting them hurt me. I can want good things for them without sacrificing my own well-being. I can be their mother without being their victim. Tommy nodded. processing this with the seriousness that had always made him seem older than his years. "I'm glad you figured that out," he said finally. "Even if it took my family being jerks for you to get there." Winter came again, my third winter as a free woman. The seasons had become markers of my growth, each one bringing new experiences, new friendships, new discoveries about who I was, when I wasn't defined solely by my relationships to other people. I had joined a senior hiking group that met every Saturday morning. We weren't climbing mountains, but we were exploring trails in Prospect Park and other parts of Brooklyn, getting exercise and fresh air, and the satisfaction that comes from moving your body through beautiful spaces. My watercolor skills had improved to the point where I was now teaching beginner classes at the community center. There was deep satisfaction in sharing knowledge, in helping other people discover their own creativity, in being seen as someone who had valuable skills to offer. The book club had become like a second family to me. We had read dozens of books together, shared countless hours of discussion, supported each other through illnesses and losses and celebrations. These women knew me as Margaret the artist, Margaret the reader, Margaret the friend, not just as someone's mother or someone's caretaker. Janet and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm of weekly phone calls and monthly visits that felt natural rather than forced. She had started therapy to work through her own issues with money and family dynamics, and I could see the changes in how she related to me and to Tommy. Michael remained more distant, but the angry manipulation had stopped. Occasionally, he sent brief texts checking on my health or sharing news about his life. It wasn't the relationship I had once hoped for, but it was honest, which was more than we had ever had before. Tommy was thriving in his senior year of high school, excited about college and the future. He had been accepted to several schools with good computer science programs, and while I would miss his regular visits, I was proud of the young man he was becoming. One evening in March, as I was preparing dinner for myself in my quiet apartment, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, but warm. "Yes? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm calling about your neighbor, Mrs. Carmen Delgado." My heart stopped. Mrs. Delgado, who had become such a treasured friend, who had saved my life with her warning 3 years ago. "She's been in an accident," Dr. Chen continued. "Nothing life-threatening, but she's going to be hospitalized for a few days. She asked me to call you. She said you're the closest thing to family she has in New York." I was at the hospital within an hour, carrying flowers from the corner store and a book of poetry I thought she might enjoy. I found her in a semi-private room, looking small and fragile in the hospital bed but smiling when she saw me. "Margaret," she said, reaching for my hand. "You came." "Of course I came," I said, settling into the bedside chair. "What happened?" "Slipped on some ice like a foolish old woman," she said with a rueful laugh. "Broke my wrist and got a concussion. They want to keep me for observation." We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She told me about her younger days as a teacher, about her late husband who had been a jazz musician, about her children who lived in California and called on holidays but had their own busy lives. "You know," she said as visiting hours were coming to an end, "that morning when I warned you about going home, I almost didn't say anything." "Why not?" "Because it wasn't my business," she said. "Because I didn't want to get involved in family drama. Because I thought maybe I was misunderstanding what I had witnessed." "What changed your mind?" She squeezed my hand with her uninjured fingers. "I saw your face," she said simply. "You looked like a woman who had forgotten she was worth saving. And I couldn't let that happen to someone I cared about." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This woman, this neighbor who barely knew me at the time, had risked an awkward social situation to protect me from a betrayal I might never have seen coming. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more deeply than she could possibly know. Not just for warning me, but for seeing someone worth warning. Over the next few days, I visited Mrs. Delgado every evening after her children couldn't make the trip from California. I brought books and magazines, helped her with phone calls, and simply provided the presence of someone who cared about her comfort and recovery. Sitting in that hospital room, I realized something profound. This was what family was supposed to feel like, not obligation or manipulation or transaction, but simply showing up for someone because they mattered to you. When Mrs. Delgado was discharged, I helped her get settled back in her apartment and arranged for grocery delivery for the first week while her wrist healed. It felt natural to take care of someone who had taken care of me, to be useful without being used. Spring brought another milestone. Tommy graduated from high school with honors and a full scholarship to study computer science at an excellent university upstate. The whole family attended his graduation ceremony, sitting in the same section but maintaining the careful boundaries we had all learned to respect. Watching Tommy walk across that stage to receive his diploma, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with reflected glory and everything to do with genuine love for this remarkable young man. He had grown up witnessing family dysfunction, but had somehow managed to become kind, honest, and emotionally intelligent. At the graduation party afterwards, held at Janet's house, I found myself actually enjoying the company of my family. Not because anything fundamental had changed about our relationships, but because I had changed how I showed up in those relationships. I didn't need anything from any of them anymore. I wasn't waiting for validation or affection or financial support. I was simply present as myself, able to enjoy the good moments without being destroyed by the difficult ones. Michael approached me toward the end of the evening, looking nervous but determined. "Mom," he said quietly, "could I talk to you for a minute?" We stepped out onto Janet's back patio, away from the noise of the party. The spring air was warm and sweet with the scent of flowering trees. "I've been thinking a lot about that letter I wrote you," he began. "It was a good letter," I said honestly. "It meant a lot to me that you wrote it. I want to do more than apologize," he said. "I want to actually change. But I don't know how to have a relationship with you that isn't based on what I need from you." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever said to me. "What would you want from a friendship?" I asked. "From someone you cared about who wasn't related to you?" He thought about this seriously. "I guess I'd want to know how they were doing, what they were interested in. I'd want to share things about my life that mattered to me. I'd want to enjoy their company." "Those sound like good starting points," I said. "Is it too late?" he asked. "Have I screwed this up beyond repair?" "It's not too late," I said. "But it's also not going to be quick or easy. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly, with consistency over time." "I understand," he said. "And I want to try if you're willing." Looking at my son in the fading light of that spring evening, I saw not the man who had tried to manipulate and control me, but the little boy who used to help me bake cookies and tell me about his dreams. Both versions were true. Both were part of who he was. "I'm willing," I said. That summer, I did something I had never done in my adult life. I threw myself a birthday party. Not a family obligation or a milestone celebration that other people organized, but a party because I wanted to celebrate my life and the people who had chosen to be part of it. I rented the community room at the local library and invited everyone who had become important to me over the past 3 years. The hiking group, the book club, my art class friends, Mrs. Delgado, Rosa, even some of the younger staff members from the community center who had become like surrogate grandchildren to me. Janet came, and Michael, and Tommy, of course. But they were guests among many others, not the center around which everything revolved. The party was everything I had never known I wanted. There was laughter and good food and stories about shared adventures and plans for future ones. People gave speeches about our friendships, our creative projects, our hiking expeditions. Margaret Walsh, my attorney, attended and brought me a small cactus plant from her garden. "For someone who has learned to bloom in harsh conditions," she said with a smile. Rosa presented me with a watercolor she had painted of my hands holding a paintbrush. "The hands that learned it's never too late to create something beautiful," she said. Mrs. Delgado, still recovering from her accident but determined to be there, brought me a small photo album filled with pictures she had taken of me over the past year, painting in the park, laughing at book club meetings, hiking with my group. "I wanted you to see yourself the way other people see you," she explained. Looking through those photos, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. A woman who looked genuinely happy. Not the forced smile of someone trying to please others, but the natural joy of someone who was living authentically. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Tommy approached me with a small wrapped package. I wanted to give this to you privately, he said. Inside was a leather journal with my initials embossed on the cover, and a note in his careful handwriting. Grandma? The note read, You've taught me that it's never too late to start writing your own story. I thought you might want a new book for the next chapter. I hugged him tight, this wise young man who had somehow understood exactly what I needed to hear. Later that evening, sitting in my quiet apartment with the gifts from my party arranged around me and the sound of the city humming through my windows, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 4 years ago, I had been a woman waiting to die, marking time in an apartment that felt like a prison, defining myself entirely through relationships that brought me no joy. I had been counting my worth in dollars given and sacrifices made, measuring my value by how much others needed me rather than how much they loved me. Now I was a woman fully alive, surrounded by people who chose my company, engaged in activities that challenged and fulfilled me, secure in my own worth regardless of how others treated me. The change hadn't been easy or quick. There had been lonely nights and difficult confrontations and moments when I wondered if standing up for myself was worth the cost of family relationships. But sitting there surrounded by evidence of the life I had built for myself, I knew with absolute certainty that every difficult decision had been worth it. I opened the journal Tommy had given me and began to write. My name is Margaret Rodriguez. I am 74 years old, and this is the first day of the best part of my life. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of another season of growth and change. Tommy had left for college, but we talked every week, and he visited during breaks. Janet continued to work on rebuilding our relationship, slowly learning to see me as a complete person rather than just her mother. Michael sent occasional texts and had taken to calling on holidays, brief conversations, but genuine ones. I had started volunteering at a literacy program for elderly immigrants, helping people my age learn to read English or improve their skills. It was deeply satisfying work, using my life experience to help others navigate their own challenges. The art classes had evolved into a small collective of senior artists who were planning an exhibition for the spring. My paintings had improved dramatically, but more importantly, I had found joy in the process of creation that had nothing to do with outside validation or approval. One crisp October morning, exactly 4 years after Mrs. Delgado's life-changing warning, I was walking my usual route when I saw a moving truck in front of her building. My heart sank as I realized what this meant. She was leaving, moving away, probably to be closer to her children in California. I found her on her front steps, directing the movers with the efficiency of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. Carmen? I called out, using her first name as I had learned to do over the years of our friendship. She turned and smiled when she saw me, though I could see sadness in her eyes. Margaret, she said, coming to hug me. I was hoping I'd see you before I left. When did you decide? I asked. After the accident, she said. I realized I needed to be closer to family while I still could. My daughter has found me a nice senior community near her. Nothing fancy, but with people my age and activities I might enjoy. I felt a stab of loss at the thought of losing this dear friend, this woman who had played such a crucial role in my transformation. But I also understood her decision. Unlike me, she had children who genuinely wanted her nearby, who had found ways to include her in their lives without trying to control them. I'm going to miss you so much, I said, meaning it deeply. And I'm going to miss you too, she replied. But I want you to know how proud I am of what you've built here, the life you've created, the person you've become. She pressed a key into my hand. I want you to have something, she said, leading me to her small front garden, the one she had been tending that morning when she saved my life. My roses, she said simply. I can't take them with me, but I can't bear to think of them dying. Would you take care of them? I looked at the small rose bushes that had been her pride and joy, and I understood what she was really giving me. Not just plants, but the responsibility and pleasure of nurturing something beautiful. I would be honored, I said. We spent her last hour in Brooklyn transplanting her roses to pots that I could carry to my fire escape garden. As we worked together in the dirt, she shared stories about each variety, when she had planted them, what they symbolized to her. This pink one, she said, carefully loosening the roots. I planted the year my husband died. It's called New Dawn, and it blooms twice a year. I thought that was appropriate. The idea that beautiful things can come back even after they seem to end. As the moving truck pulled away with her personal belongings, Carmen and I stood together on the sidewalk where our friendship had begun. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me that morning, for caring enough to warn me, for changing my life." "You changed your own life," she corrected gently. "I just planted a seed. You did all the growing." I watched her taxi disappear around the corner, carrying away one of the most important people in my new life. But instead of feeling abandoned or lost, I felt grateful. Grateful for our friendship. Grateful for the lessons she had taught me. Grateful for the demonstration that love doesn't always mean holding on. That winter, I made a decision that surprised even me. I applied to be a mentor in a program that paired older adults with seniors who were struggling with family relationships or financial exploitation. Margaret Walsh, who served on the board of the organization, had suggested that my experience might help others in similar situations. At first, the idea terrified me. What if I wasn't wise enough, strong enough, articulate enough to help other people navigate the challenges I had barely survived myself? But then I remembered something Carmen had said about seeds and growing, and I decided that maybe my struggle could become someone else's strength. The program paired me with Eleanor, a 78-year-old woman whose daughter and son-in-law had moved in with her, temporarily, 3 years earlier, and were now controlling her finances, monitoring her phone calls, and gradually isolating her from friends and outside activities. Eleanor's situation was more extreme than mine had been, but the underlying dynamic was heartbreakingly familiar. She had been trained to believe that family needed her, that her role was to give until there was nothing left, that asking for respect or autonomy was selfish and ungrateful. "I just don't know what I did wrong," she said during our first meeting, her coffee cup shaking in her frail hands. "I gave them everything, and now they act like I'm a burden." "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her firmly. "You loved them the best way you knew how. But sometimes the people we love don't know how to love us back." Over the following months, I watched Eleanor go through the same painful process of recognition, anger, and eventual liberation that I had experienced. It wasn't easy. Her family fought every boundary she tried to establish, every attempt she made to reclaim her own life. But with support, with legal assistance from Margaret Walsh's firm, and with the knowledge that someone else had walked this path and survived, Eleanor slowly began to rebuild her life on her own terms. "I never thought I could be strong enough," she told me one afternoon as we sat in the same coffee shop where I had hidden from my own family's manipulations years earlier. "Strength isn't something you either have or don't have," I replied. "It's something you build, one decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one day of choosing yourself at a time." Working with Eleanor and the other women I mentored through the program gave new meaning to everything I had endured. My pain hadn't been wasted if it could help someone else find their way to freedom. Spring returned with Cameron's roses blooming beautifully in their pots on my fire escape. The New Dawn variety she had told me about produced 2 spectacular flushes of pink blooms, just as she had promised. I sent her photos, and she sent back pictures of her new garden in California and updates about her life near her daughter's family. Tommy finished his freshman year of college with excellent grades and stories about new friends, challenging classes, and the excitement of independence. During his spring break visit, we spent hours talking about his future plans, his relationship with a girl named Lisa who sounded wonderful, and his gratitude for the lessons our family's dysfunction had taught him about healthy relationships. "I think I'm going to study abroad next year," he told me one evening as we looked through his college photos together. "Where are you thinking?" I asked. "Maybe Japan," he said. "I'm interested in their technology program, but also I want to see more of the world. I want to have adventures while I'm young." I smiled, remembering my own trip to Santa Fe and the liberation I had felt in discovering I could navigate new places and experiences alone. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I'm so proud of your courage." "I learned it from you, Grandma," he said simply. That summer brought another surprise. Janet called to tell me she was getting married again, to a man named David who had been her friend for several years before their relationship became romantic. "I'd like you to meet him," she said, her voice tentative. "Not because I need your approval, but because he's important to me, and you're important to me. It was a small but significant distinction, the difference between seeking permission and sharing joy. David turned out to be a kind, thoughtful man who worked as a teacher and treated Janet with the respect and partnership she had never experienced in her first marriage. More importantly, he was genuinely interested in getting to know me as Janet's mother, but also as Margaret the person. "Janet talks about you a lot," he said during our first meeting. "About your art, your volunteering, your independence. She's really proud of who you've become." It was strange and wonderful to hear myself described not as someone's burden or problem, but as someone worthy of pride and admiration. The wedding was small and heartfelt, held in a garden venue with close friends and family. I wore a dress I had bought for the occasion, not because I was required to attend or because I was paying for anything, but because I genuinely wanted to celebrate Janet's happiness. Michael was there too, and we had what might have been our first normal conversation in years. He told me about his work, his efforts to repair his marriage, the therapy he was attending to deal with his financial anxiety and control issues. "I'm learning a lot about myself," he said as we watched Janet and David dance together. "Most of it isn't very flattering, but it's honest." "Honesty is a good place to start," I said. "Mom," he said after a pause, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think we'll ever be okay? You and me?" I looked at my son, this middle-aged man who was finally learning to take responsibility for his choices and their consequences, and I felt something I hadn't felt toward him in years: hope. "I think we're already becoming okay," I said, slowly, but genuinely. As autumn approached again, marking 5 years since that morning walk that changed everything, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected shape my life had taken. None of it had gone according to plan. Not my children's relationships with me, not my financial situation, not my daily routine, not my sense of identity, but all of it had gone according to something deeper than plan, according to my authentic self, my actual values, my real needs, rather than the ones I thought I was supposed to have. I was no longer the woman who defined herself through sacrifice and service to ungrateful family members. But I also wasn't bitter or closed off or afraid to love. I had learned the difference between loving someone and letting them hurt you, between being generous and being exploited, between family obligation and genuine relationship. My apartment felt like a home now, rather than a waiting room. It was filled with art supplies and books, photos of friends and adventures, plants that I tended because I enjoyed their beauty, rather than because someone expected it of me. My days were full, but not frantic, purposeful, but not driven by other people's needs and demands. I painted, I read, I mentored women who were finding their own strength. I volunteered with literacy students who reminded me that it's never too late to learn new things. Most importantly, I had learned to be alone without being lonely, to be independent without being isolated, to be strong without being hard. One evening in October, I was walking past the corner where Mrs. Delgado used to tend her roses when I saw a familiar figure, a woman about my age, trudging slowly with her head down, clutching her phone with the desperate hope I remembered so well. She looked up as I approached, and I saw in her face the same resignation and sadness I had carried for so many years, the look of someone who had forgotten she was worth saving. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Are you all right?" She paused, surprised by the question. "Oh, yes," she said automatically. Just tired, I suppose." "Would you like to sit for a moment?" I asked, gesturing toward a small bench outside the corner store. "Sometimes it helps to rest." She looked at me with curiosity and perhaps a little wariness, but she sat down beside me on the bench. "I'm Margaret," I said. "Anne," she replied. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the evening foot traffic pass by. Finally, she sighed deeply. "I was just coming from my daughter's apartment," she said. "We had a difficult conversation." Something in her tone reminded me so much of myself 5 years earlier that my heart ached with recognition. "Those can be the hardest kind," I said softly. "She wants me to sell my house," Anne continued, the words tumbling out as if she had been holding them back for a long time. "Says I'm too old to maintain it, that I should move somewhere smaller, more manageable. But it's my home." I raised my children there. My husband and I were happy there. What do you want to do? I asked. The question seemed to surprise her. No one's asked me that, she said. Everyone keeps telling me what I should do, what would be best, what makes sense. But no one's asked what I want. I'm asking, I said simply. For the next hour, as the sun set over Brooklyn and the streetlights began to flicker on, Anne told me her story. It was heartbreakingly familiar. Adult children who saw her house as an asset to be liquidated, her independence as a problem to be managed, her preferences as obstacles to their convenience. I feel so selfish, she said finally. They say they're just worried about me, that they want what's best. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am too old, too stubborn, too set in my ways. Or maybe, I said gently, you're exactly the right age to know what you want and strong enough to insist on it. She looked at me with something that might have been hope. Do you really think so? I think, I said, that you're the only one who gets to decide what's best for your life. And I think that wisdom comes from experience, not from youth. As we parted ways that evening, I gave Anne my phone number and told her about the support group Margaret Walsh had helped me connect with, the resources available for seniors navigating family pressure around housing and finances. You don't have to figure this out alone, I told her. Walking home, I thought about the circle of experience, the way understanding flows from one person to another, the seeds that Carmen had talked about planting and growing. 5 years ago, Mrs. Delgado had seen something in me worth saving. Tonight, maybe I had seen something in Anne worth nurturing. That winter brought news that Margaret Walsh was retiring from her law practice to focus on advocacy and education around elder rights. She asked me to speak at a conference for attorneys who worked with senior clients, to share my story and help them understand the emotional dynamics behind the legal issues they handled. Standing at the podium in a hotel conference room, looking out at an audience of lawyers and social workers and advocates, I felt a moment of disbelief. 5 years earlier, I had been a woman who could barely advocate for herself, who apologized for taking up space, who defined her worth by her usefulness to others. Now I was someone whose experience was valued, whose insights could help professionals help other people, whose voice could make a difference in the world. 5 years ago, I began, I was a different person. I was someone who believed that love was something you earned through sacrifice, that respect was something you bought with money, that family meant accepting whatever treatment people chose to give you. I told them about the morning walk, about Mrs. Delgado's warning, about the painful process of learning to value myself enough to demand better treatment from the people who claimed to love me. The hardest part, I said, wasn't standing up to my children. It was believing I deserved to be stood up for. After my presentation, several attorneys approached me with their own stories, their own struggles with helping clients who had been conditioned to accept mistreatment as love. One young lawyer told me that my talk had helped her understand why her elderly clients often seemed reluctant to pursue legal protections against family members who were clearly exploiting them. It's not really about the money, she said. It's about believing they deserve better. Exactly, I replied. Money is just how the manipulation happens, but the real issue is whether you see yourself as a person with rights or as a resource to be consumed. Spring came again. My 6th spring as a free woman. Anne had become a regular member of our support group and was successfully defending her right to stay in her home, while also building a network of friends and activities that made her life richer and more fulfilling. Tommy was preparing for his study abroad semester in Japan, excited and nervous about the adventure ahead. Janet and David were talking about starting a small business together, a catering company that would allow them to be creative and work as partners. Michael had made slow but steady progress in rebuilding our relationship. His marriage was stronger, his finances were more stable, and most importantly, he had learned to have conversations with me that weren't centered around what he needed from me. I was thinking, he said during one of our monthly phone calls, maybe I could take you to lunch next week, not for any particular reason, just because I'd like to spend some time with you. It was such a simple request, but it represented years of growth and change for both of us. As I sat in my garden that morning, surrounded by Carmen's roses in full bloom and my own small vegetable plot, I reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought me here. I thought about the woman I had been, waiting for scraps of affection from people who saw me as an obligation rather than a joy. I thought about the moment of recognition, the painful process of setting boundaries, the gradual building of a life based on self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. Most of all, I thought about the unexpected gift of time. At 74, then 75, now approaching 76, I was having experiences and building relationships and discovering parts of myself that I had never known existed. It occurred to me that maybe this was the real purpose of growing older. Not to become invisible or irrelevant or a burden to be managed, but to finally become fully yourself, stripped of the roles and expectations and compromises that define younger years. Maybe the gift of age wasn't wisdom, though that came too. Maybe it was permission to stop trying to please everyone else and start honoring the person you had always been, but never had the courage to be. That evening, I opened the journal Tommy had given me for my birthday 2 years earlier. I had filled nearly half of it with thoughts and reflections and stories from my new life. On a fresh page, I wrote, "Today, I realized that I am not waiting for my life to begin anymore. I am not counting down days until something better happens. I am not measuring my worth by other people's treatment of me. Today, I am simply living, fully and authentically and joyfully, and that is enough." The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 10 o'clock. Its familiar sound no longer marking time spent in loneliness, but time spent in presence, awareness, gratitude for the life I had built with my own choices and courage. I closed the journal and prepared for bed, looking forward to tomorrow, not because I expected anything extraordinary to happen, but because I had learned that an ordinary day lived authentically is extraordinary enough. As I turned off the lights and settled into sleep, I thought one more time about Mrs. Delgado's roses blooming on my fire escape, about the seeds she had talked about planting and growing, about the ways we save each other by seeing each other clearly. And I thought about Anne and Eleanor and all the other women who were just beginning to discover their own worth, their own strength, their own right to lives lived on their own terms. The circle continues, I thought, as sleep took hold. The seed becomes the flower becomes the seed, and all of us are both planted and planting, both saved and saving, both student and teacher, in the endless curriculum of becoming fully human. 6 months later, on a crisp morning in October, I was walking my familiar route when I saw a young woman hurrying past, her phone pressed to her ear, her face tight with stress and exhaustion. She was speaking rapidly in Spanish, her voice rising with frustration. As she ended the call and slowed her pace, I could see the tears in her eyes. Without thinking, I approached her. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Are you all right?" She looked at me with surprise, probably wondering why a stranger would care about her obvious distress. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I didn't mean to. I'm fine." "You don't have to be fine," I said. "Sometimes things aren't fine, and that's okay too." Something in my voice must have reaching her, because she paused, really looking at me for the first time. "It's my grandmother," she said finally. "She's been living with us, but my mother says we need to move her to a facility, that we can't take care of her anymore." "What does your grandmother think?" I asked. "No one's asked her," she said, echoing Anne's words from years earlier. "Everyone's just talking about what would be easier for the family." I thought about Mrs. Delgado, about the morning she had chosen to warn a stranger rather than mind her own business, about the difference between interference and intervention, between helping and enabling, between minding your own business and recognizing that sometimes someone else's business is exactly what you need to mind. "Would you like to talk about it?" I asked. I have some experience with family situations like this. We ended up spending 2 hours in Brooklyn Beans, the same coffee shop where I had hidden from my own family's manipulations years earlier. I told her about support resources, about legal protections, about the importance of including elderly family members in decisions about their own lives. But mostly, I listened as she talked about loving her grandmother, about feeling caught between family pressure and her own sense of what was right, about not knowing how to advocate for someone without causing family conflict. "The thing is," she said finally, "my grandmother raised me when my parents were working all the time. She taught me to cook, helped me with homework, listened to all my problems. She's the reason I'm in graduate school now, became the person I am, And now, and now you want to honor that, I said. You want to make sure she's treated with the same love and respect she gave you. Yes, she said, tears flowing freely now. But everyone acts like I'm being unrealistic, like I don't understand how difficult it is. Love is difficult, I said. But abandonment isn't love, even when it's convenient. As I walked home that afternoon, I thought about cycles and seasons, about the ways we are all connected across generations and experiences. I thought about the woman I had been, afraid to ask for what I needed, waiting for other people to value me. And I thought about the woman I had become, confident enough in my own worth to recognize it in others. That evening, I called Tommy to tell him about my encounter with the young woman. "That's amazing, Grandma," he said. "You've become like a one-woman crisis intervention team." "I think I've just become someone who remembers what it feels like to be invisible," I said, "and who doesn't want anyone else to feel that way." "You were never invisible to me," he said softly. "I know, sweetheart. You were the light that reminded me I was still worth seeing." After we hung up, I sat on my fire escape among Carmen's roses, watching the sunset over Brooklyn. The city spread out below me, full of people loving and struggling and learning to be human together. Somewhere out there, Anne was enjoying dinner in her own home, the one she had fought to keep. Somewhere else, Eleanor was volunteering at a library, using her freedom to help other people find theirs. And somewhere, a young woman was fighting for her grandmother's dignity, armed with information and support, and the knowledge that she wasn't alone. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, marking another hour in a life that had become precious to me not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. I had stopped waiting for other people to give my life meaning, and had started creating meaning for myself. And in that creation, I had discovered something beautiful. When you stop trying to please everyone else, you become genuinely pleasant to be around. When you stop accepting crumbs of love, you become capable of offering real nourishment. When you start honoring yourself, you teach other people how to honor you too. The roses released their evening fragrance into the cooling air, and I breathed it in deeply, grateful for the woman who had planted them, grateful for the morning she had chosen to save a neighbor she barely knew, grateful for the life I had built from the seeds of her kindness and my own courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose myself, new chances to plant seeds in other people's lives. But tonight, I was simply content to sit among the flowers and know that I had learned, finally and completely, that I was worth saving. And if you've ever felt used, abandoned, or unseen by the people who are supposed to love you most, if you've ever wondered whether you matter, whether you deserve better, whether it's too late to start over, I promise you this: it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to plant new seeds. It's never too late to bloom. Have you ever lived through something like this? Or known someone who has? Has your family ever made you feel more like a resource than a person you love? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Together we can keep opening our hearts, sharing our truths, and reminding each other that we are all worth saving, worth loving, and worth choosing, especially by ourselves.